You're listening to episode 322, Weeds and Seeds of Ministry, number 5.
Welcome to Transforming Missions Podcast, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
Now, we'll explore this week's weeds and seeds in just a minute, but let's first clarify what these terms mean and why they're significant.
Sure, as a reminder, weeds are the challenges that pastors and leaders face, like overwhelm, fear, time constraints, and isolation, which can stifle our potential. If not managed, these weeds can spread, diminishing our effectiveness as leaders. The key is to recognize and remove them promptly, making room for the seeds.
And seeds are the counterbalance to the weeds, positive practices that foster growth and successful leadership. And so by implementing practices like equipping others and building trust, we can thrive, fulfilling our calling and serving those whom we lead. So, are you ready for this week's weed?
I think we are. Would you like me to get us started?
Please do.
So our fifth weed is Anything Goes Anemone. Anything Goes Anemone is close friends with the busy bees we met in the orchard of overwhelm. Remember that weed?
Well, I do. It seems to pop up since we've had that conversation and released that episode.
So you can head over to transformingmission.org/319 to listen to that episode.
So how is Anything Goes Anemone close friends with the orchard of overwhelm?
So as you can imagine, when anything goes, there's a lot happening, a lot of busyness. Notice I didn't say business or ministry, I said busyness. Anything Goes Anemone can show a full calendar of events where people do many different things, but the busyness isn't fruitful. They're events disconnected from the mission and the community within and beyond the local church.
Yeah, the church prides itself in filling a calendar. When I was early in my ministry, we used to call that the 7-day-a-week church. It's kind of like if you got activities going and you can get people in the building, you've got it made. Sarah, I'm just thinking at this point, if you stand in a garage, it doesn't make you a car. And if you crawl into an oven, it doesn't make you a pan of biscuits. But somewhere we thought with all the busyness, if we could just get people in a building, they would turn out to be Christian.
You have nailed exactly what we're talking about here with Anything Goes Anemone. A calendar of ministry opportunities can be a wonderful thing when there's both capacity and focus within those ministries. When the calendar items are ministries for people to grow in their faith, connect to God and each other, and be blessed by serving in the community, those are fruitful ministries. But those calendar items are not the norm with Anything Goes Anemone. Instead, the anything goes mentality often leaves things to chance and simply provides a plethora of choices for people. So if you want to talk about World War II or the Cold War, you can. Or you can have tea with people or engage in a hobby that has no connection to faith. All of those are great things for people to do. And at the same time, the church has a focus, and our focus is on Jesus. So where there isn't connection between those two things, you're finding yourself in the midst of Anything Goes Anemone.
Yeah, that's exactly what comes to mind, is that the way I would say it, we've not only lost our focus on Jesus, who is the reason for our mission, but we are not connected with our mission. Because, as you said, anything goes. And when you're not focused, I used to have a professor that says, when you aim at nothing, you usually hit it. And that's what's happening with Anything Goes Anemone. So what's the impact of Anything Goes?
There isn't an impact. People are busy, but not growing as disciples of Jesus. They can also get exhausted and burn out. So I guess that is impact. It's just not a positive impact. if I could help this weed transform, I'd invite them to focus on the mission and ask the questions that we discussed when we shared about Mission Myrtle in episode 321. Things like, how does what you're doing align with the mission? Very simple question, but very straightforward.
That seems to be our tune, doesn't it? The drum that we beat. With that said, we tend to stay out of tactics and focus on transformation, but there is something that can help people move the conversation in a different direction. So what is that?
Sure. Let me offer a few things. And if you're thinking of something specifically, please add to this. A couple of tactics for getting out of the anything goes mode. We already named it. Ask how it relates to the mission every time you're scheduling something. Notice I didn't say once in a while. Every time something goes on the calendar, get in the habit of asking the question, how is this helping us to fulfill our mission? Another thing that you can do is do a debrief or post-mortem on everything. So you have an event and you ask the question, what worked? Why did it work? What didn't work? Why didn't it work? What would you do differently? What do you celebrate? What did you learn about your leadership? And, how did that help us further our mission? So again, you're having conversation about what the event was and why you were doing it. And you might even ask in the midst of that, do we want to do this again? Was it fruitful? Was there benefit? I have had conversations with people about having events at local churches, and there's no follow-up that happens. It doesn't lead anywhere. So there might be things that you're doing that aren't, if I can say it this way, churchy things. But at those non-quote-unquote churchy things, what's the connection point that's leading them to a new place that you might have an opportunity to introduce them to Jesus or connect them to the life of the church? So that's another thing that you could do. I'd also begin to invite people to name where they've seen Jesus in the past week beyond the walls of the church. We've said this one before. We'll say it again. This is all to help raise awareness of Jesus and God's movement in people's daily lives. If you want to transform your leadership, here are a few other questions you might ask as a leader. Are the items on your calendar purposeful? What can others do that you're doing to free you up to help more people focus on what? The mission. And the last thing that I would offer is just remember that there are life cycles to everything. Just because something has happened for 2 or 3 years doesn't mean it has to continue. If you need to change a pattern on something, it's okay to change it.
What I'm thinking is I lived in a community once that they said it had a river that went on the edge of town. And there was a discussion about building a bridge across the river. And they did, but the bridge went to nowhere. It was a good bridge, well designed, and lots of people could drive over it and walk over it, but it didn't go anywhere. And that's really what anything goes. You're asking the question, does this take us to the mission or help us with the mission? Or otherwise, you've just got a lot of good things, and they're fun to be with. They're usually for ourselves and not for making disciples for the transformation of the world. They don't take us anywhere. Another way to think about that is the church is a conduit to the mission of God. It's a conduit to making disciples. It's not an end in itself. And a lot of things, anything goes, for us are just ends in themselves because they make us feel good. They're our preferences. They are weeds in the garden.
They fill up the garden, but there's nothing fruitful there.
Exactly.
So are you ready to introduce us to the seed for this week?
Sure. Let me do that to get out of this negative part. It kind of feels like we're going back to Lent when I say this, but it has nothing to do with Lent or Holy Week or everything to do with our mission. The fifth seed is the pathway of palms. Pathway of Palms points people to following Jesus and helps people continue to grow as followers of Jesus. if we weren't being cute with seeds and weeds and seeds, we might call this, a discipleship pathway. The pathway of palms is focused on disciple making, of course, and being intentional about leading people to follow Jesus, to grow as disciples of Jesus, serve in ministry, share their faith. That's what a pathway of palms or a discipleship pathway would be about.
So what you're saying is, along the pathway of palms, people grow and become people of hope. And when I'm saying hope, I'm saying that as an acronym of HOPE, hospitality, offering Christ, practicing the faith, and engaging in acts of service and justice in our local community.
Exactly. Pathway of Palms always starts where people are and then helps them take the next faithful step in growing as disciples of Jesus. And one of the things, Sarah, I like that you have said when we talk about hope as hospitality, offering Christ, practicing the faith, and engaging the community, is that you can start anywhere. People are at different places. And so within the context of where people are, you start where they are and then help with the other. I mean, if people are, let's just say there are some who want to be engaged in community, and that's where they start. Then you can introduce to them, you can offer them Christ at that point. You can help them begin to practice the faith, but their ground point is engaging the community. That's just an example. You do that better than I do, but I just remember you saying those things over and over as we've engaged in the community and helped other people get there.
Yeah, and I think you highlighted the one that I think is the most natural entry point for people in terms of engaging service, because it's real easy to include prayer when you're serving. It's real easy to add a little Bible study. There's nothing little about a Bible study, but you get what I mean, to a time of service. And then in small ways, you're starting to offer Christ, you're starting to practice the faith, and they all get intertwined. So part of what I was thinking about as you started naming the discipleship pathway is you've been writing about different aspects of our mission since the beginning of the year on the blog. Is there anything that you'd want to highlight from the blog here?
Well, how many more episodes do we have, Sarah? Sorry, that's not the right answer. As I've been writing, there are a couple of things that keep coming back, and I have to remember, you've already written this, just send people back to what you've been writing. The mission, if I may say this, and this is what we're talking about, this discipleship pathway is based upon, it's God's mission, it's not ours. And one of the things I think congregations, and I've done it too, but I think we in congregations feel like we've got to come up with a mission. Hey, the mission's already given to us. The question is, how are we going to live it out in our context? That's the big part. And sometimes what I've done to try to, because when we talk about mission, there are two ways to misunderstand that. One of them is missions, like we're doing something to or for somebody somewhere else. And the other one is, which comes from business. And it's not a wrong thing and it's not a bad thing. It's just that the mission in a business and the mission in the church are two different things. A mission in a business is to make profit. The mission in the church is to love people. What we've done, and this is part of what I'm trying to point out over and over and over, is that we've kind of taken the mission of a business and moved it to the church, so that what we're doing in the church, we call it a discipleship pathway, but what we're trying to do is get more people into the building so we can have more money, so we can do more activities.
Not the point.
That's not the point. So I'll stop with that, because I keep coming back to that. Even when we offer Christ, we've come to a place where we say, well, that's not my gift. I can't do that. It's not about knowing how to do something about talking about your faith or introducing or witnessing to somebody or knocking on a door or whatever. It's living your life the way God would have you live your life, so that when people have an interaction with you or you encounter people, they're experiencing God's love in and through you. That's when you offer Christ. And you don't have to say anything because that's who you are. That's part of what is coming through a blog at this point that I think adds to what we're talking about with the pathway. So thanks for letting me just go on and on about the things that I think are important.
That is all good. And if you are thinking, gosh, I don't even know where to start with helping our congregation really think about the mission, part of what I'm reflecting on is that you started the year with preparing for mission. So go back to January and read the articles that are about preparing. And now you're actually writing about the engaging in mission and walking through the discipleship pathway. So why don't we talk a little bit more about discipleship pathways in terms of their importance? And maybe that's my question. Why are discipleship pathways important? And what does a pathway offer a church and the people that are a part of that congregation?
Okay, so let me be my usual smart aleck self. It's a path, Sarah. It's a path.
I deserve that one.
I'm sorry. I need to be serious. It offers people clarity on what it means to be a disciple and how they can go about engaging and growing as disciples. Now, I want to stop there just a moment and say, here's one of our disconnects, and this is why we're talking about the pathway of the palms, and that is we sometimes get stuck on thinking that if we're making disciples, helping people grow as disciples, that's something that we're doing to somebody else. We are on the path as well. So it helps everyone know that there's a place for them by offering different opportunities for growth and how they can relate to others and to Jesus. A pathway, I think a pathway keeps us focused on the mission, but it also gives us guardrails. And we've already talked about the guardrails because everything we do keeps us moving toward the mission. So then we ask the question, does this help us stay on the path? Maybe that's the way. Does it help us stay on the path to get us to where we're going? And there are signposts along the path. And sometimes you have to make decisions about which path you're going to take as you're going. And your pathway is a pathway of being a follower of Jesus and being a disciple. So when you come to the place where you have to make a decision, you say, which one takes me to Jesus, or which one takes me to be a follower of Jesus or a disciple of Jesus? So that's really the purpose and the value of what we call a pathway of discipleship.
Yeah, it's the complete antithesis of Anything Goes Anemone. And you don't ever graduate from a discipleship pathway. You go deeper on the path, but you don't ever finish the path.
You're exactly right, and that's one of the paradoxes that we have in our Christian faith. I think we miss that the focus actually frees us up to follow Jesus. We get stuck in this thing that if we offer enough things that anything goes, then that allows people to make decisions to do what they feel good about, and they get their preferences. But without a direction, people don't engage. Without a goal or a path to walk on, they just don't engage because they don't know where to start. They don't know how to continue growing. And that's what the church is about. It's the place that helps people find a place for their growth to be who God created them to be. So if the church is an end in itself, we think about it one way. If the church is a conduit, we think about it another. And if it's a conduit, We offer a path for growth and development and becoming who God created us to be.
That's well said, Tim. Any other wisdom that you'd like to offer in this episode about either the weed, Anything Goes Anemone, or the seed, the pathway of palms and discipleship pathways?
So one of the things I like about you, Sarah, is you always think that after I've given all the wisdom I have, there's still more to come. What I would offer to our listeners is that I know that it seems like it's easy to say. I also know that it's not necessarily easy to do. So here's this deep thought that I have for our time today, and that is, and it's nothing you haven't heard me say before, it matters where you start. And on the pathway, you start with Jesus. You start with Jesus. You don't start with, well, our church doesn't do this, or our church does this, or our community this, or whatever. All of those are good things, but that's not why the church exists. The church exists for the love of God that we've seen in Jesus. So how do you learn about Jesus? Well, it comes through Bible study. It comes through interaction of people. It comes with, in every meeting that you have a little scripture, do a little talking about the scripture, and then send people out after the meeting to say, why don't we experience some of what we've talked about in God's love in the community this week, so that we can come back and say, this is where I experienced Jesus this since the last meeting we've had. That's what tending the pathway would be like. That's just, so as I keep thinking about that, baptism for so many people, and this is not a bad thing, it's just where we've been. Baptism for so many people seems to be a rite of passage. My grandchildren want to be baptized. They don't attend church anywhere, so would you baptize the babies? And that's a wonderful thing, but that's not what baptism is. So if we find a way to name what we're doing, and then to move forward in what God has already provided for us, baptism's God's claim, call, and commission on our lives. And when we're baptized, we're in God's business at that point. And we don't even have to ask, what is God's business? In John's gospel, if you've seen Jesus, you've seen God. And then the scripture tells us, Jesus, that God is love. If you've seen Jesus, you've seen God. So Jesus is God's love. If Jesus is the point to the whole thing, then it's about God's love. It's about caring for people. It's about meeting human need. It's not about my preferences. It's not even about my style of music. It's not even about the worship time. So I guess what I'm saying, Sarah, is that we need to get out of the weeds of anything goes and get on the path of the palms and become more who God created us to be. And that's not an empty statement. If anybody's listened to us at all, we've given you everything you need to get there.
And now you know why I ask if you have anything else to offer, because you always do. Thank you for that, and for the reminders of what it means to follow Jesus, and why we are the church and the church's place in every community. And thank you for joining us for this 5th installment of the Weeds and Seeds of Ministry, staying focused on the pathway of palms, a pathway that is filled with hope. And that's not just wishful thinking. As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/322. If you're looking for previous episodes in this series, you can find those at that same link. They'll be listed at the bottom of the show notes page. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.